The rattling of the old Ford F-150 was the only sound that made sense anymore. It was a familiar, honest-to-God mechanical tremor, a stark contrast to the slick, silent hum of the electric vehicles that clogged the arteries of Seattle. Each bump on the gravel road leading into Hollow Creek Valley felt like a small victory, shaking off another layer of the city's grime. 5 days. It had been 5 days since Leo Vance had told his former boss, a corporate slug named Peterson, exactly where he could shove his pesticide-heavy, profit-over-people agricultural project. Getting fired had been the predictable, almost rehearsed, conclusion. The severance package was a joke, but the freedom? The freedom was priceless. He steered the truck past a faded wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," its green paint flaking away like sunburnt skin. The air here was different. It didn't just smell cleaner, it felt heavier, richer, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and a century of peaceful decay. This was his grandparents' valley. His valley now. The house stood at the end of the road, a 2-story timber frame structure that looked like it had grown out of the hillside. It was old, weathered, but its bones were good. Solid oak and hickory, built by a man who understood that a home was supposed to outlive you. Leo killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant gurgle of the creek. For a moment, a genuine sense of peace washed over him, the first he'd felt in years. Then, the familiar, bitter anger bubbled up in his gut. They thought he was a failure. A brilliant urban agricultural engineer, chucked out for having a conscience. Let them think it. He'd rather be a king in this forgotten valley than a well-paid slave in their concrete zoo. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, exorcising the ghosts of dust and neglect. He threw open windows, letting the mountain air wage war against the musty smell of disuse. He swept away cobwebs that were architectural marvels of arachnid engineering and wiped down surfaces thick with the dust of forgotten years. In his grandfather's old study, while clearing out a roll-top desk, his fingers brushed against something smooth and cool. It was a bracelet, carved from a single piece of dark, heavy wood, worn smooth by decades of contact with skin. His grandpa had worn it every single day. Without a second thought, Leo slipped it onto his own wrist. It felt right, a connection to the past, a silent promise to the future. As the sun began to dip below the ridge, casting long shadows across the valley floor, the crunch of gravel announced a visitor. Leo looked up from the porch steps where he was taking a breather. A portly man in his late 50s, wearing a sheriff-style khaki shirt straining at the buttons, was waddling towards him with an air of immense self-importance. Behind him, 2 other local men shuffled their feet, looking like reluctant henchmen in a low-budget movie. Dale Higgins, the self-appointed mayor of Hollow Creek's unofficial homeowners association. A man whose only claim to fame was a son who pushed papers in some drab state government office 100 miles away. Well, Dale boomed, his voice a little too loud for the tranquil evening. He stopped a few feet away, hooking his thumbs into his belt and rocking back on his heels. Look what the cat dragged in. It's the big city engineer, Leo Vance. Heard you got a promotion? The 2 men behind him snickered. Leo remained seated, slowly turning a rusty wrench over in his hands. He didn't say a word. He just watched Dale, his eyes calm, almost clinical. He was studying him, an interesting specimen, genus, Pompous asshat icus, native to small ponds where it can feel like a big fish. Diet consists mainly of gossip and the perceived failures of others. Dale's smile faltered slightly at the lack of a panicked or defensive reaction. He cleared his throat. Figured you couldn't hack it with the smart folks, huh? Decided to come back home and play in the dirt with the rest of us simple folk? Can't say I blame you. The world out there is tough for you young fellas. No backbone. The men behind him laughed a little louder this time, a sycophantic chorus. The sound scraped against the peaceful quiet of the valley. Leo's gaze flickered from Dale to the other 2, then back to Dale. His silence was a tangible thing, a vacuum that sucked the air out of Dale's bluster. He wasn't angry. He wasn't intimidated. He looked bored, as if Dale Higgins and his entourage were nothing more than a mild, temporary annoyance, like a buzzing fly he couldn't be bothered to swat. The unspoken contempt was more insulting than any comeback. Dale's face flushed a dull red. Don't get high and mighty with me, boy. This valley has rules. We look out for each other here. You just remember who's in charge. Leo finally moved. He stood up slowly, the old wood of the porch groaning under his weight. He was taller than Dale, leaner, with a coiled stillness that the other man's flabby bulk couldn't match. He looked down at Dale, then deliberately turned his back and walked into the house, closing the screen door with a soft click behind him. No words, no acknowledgement, just complete and utter dismissal. Outside, Dale Higgins was left sputtering, his grand entrance deflated into a pathetic, public embarrassment. He mumbled something about disrespectful youth before turning and stomping back to his golf cart, his cronies trailing awkwardly behind. Later that night, Leo sat in the dimly lit living room, his laptop open. The official news channels were all abuzz about the Edison meteor cluster, a celestial event they promised would be a once-in-a-generation light show. Harmless, they said, a beautiful, free spectacle for all to enjoy. He'd heard that kind of reassuring bullshit before. It was the same tone they used to describe market corrections just before a crash. He navigated away from the mainstream sites, diving into the murkier corners of the internet, obscure foreign forums, encrypted message boards. He'd always been a data hoarder. Here, the story was different. A grainy video from a remote part of Siberia showed something that looked like a wolf, except its jaw was split down the middle, opening like a grotesque flower. The video was taken down within an hour. A post from a sailor in the Pacific described a strange, bioluminescent algae bloom that pulsed in unison, creating patterns on the water that made his crew nauseous. The post was deleted, the user banned. Hoaxes, the moderators claimed. Fear-mongering, but Leo downloaded them all. He saved every scrap of data, every panicked post, every blurry photo. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach, an instinct honed by years of seeing how the world really worked. The powerful lie, the complacent believe, and the prepared survive. The world outside his window remained blissfully ignorant. Dale Higgins was probably at the local general store right now, holding court, bragging about his son's non-existent influence, completely unaware that the world he knew was balanced on the edge of a knife. The thought brought a grim, humorless smile to Leo's lips. The next few days passed in a blur of hard labor. He repaired the leaky roof, cleaned the gutters and, most importantly, organized the vast, stone-walled cellar beneath the house. It was huge, cool, and dry, a perfect natural refrigerator. A fortress in the making. On the fifth night, the night of the supposed meteor shower, Leo stood on the back porch, a bottle of cold beer in hand, and watched the sky. There were no shooting stars. No brilliant streaks of light. Instead, the cloud cover began to glow, not with the orange of city lights, but with a sickly, ethereal green, like the phosphorescence on rotting wood. The air grew heavy, static-charged, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Then, the rain began. It wasn't a storm, just a light, hesitant drizzle. The drops felt strangely thick, almost oily. Leo held out his hand, curious, a decision he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. A single, fat droplet landed on the back of his hand, directly on the old wooden bracelet. The pain was instantaneous and shocking. It wasn't a clean burn of a flame. It was a vicious, sizzling, chemical agony. His skin hissed, and a blister immediately rose, white and angry. He cried out, snatching his hand back. The blister burst, and a bright bead of red blood welled up from the raw flesh beneath. But instead of dripping down his skin, the blood did something impossible. It flowed sideways, drawn towards the dark wood of the bracelet. He watched, mesmerized by horror and fascination, as the wood seemed to drink his blood, the crimson stain vanishing into the grain as if it were porous sponge. The agonizing burn on his skin was suddenly eclipsed by a new sensation. A profound, earthy warmth spread from the bracelet, pulsing up his arm, quieting the pain. The air filled with the rich scent of freshly tilled earth and blooming flowers, an impossible fragrance in the middle of the acid-laced drizzle. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and a single, clear thought bloomed in his mind. It wasn't in words, not in any language he knew, but in a pure, undeniable burst of understanding. The soil awakens. The world didn't tilt, it folded. One moment, Leo was on his back porch, his hand a canvas of searing agony. The next, gravity ceased to be a suggestion and became a long-lost memory. The scent of acid rain and wet pine was ripped away, replaced by something so profoundly rich and earthy it felt like inhaling life itself. He wasn't falling, he wasn't floating, he was simply elsewhere. He landed on his feet with a soft thud, the impact absorbed by soil so dark and loamy it looked like black velvet. The pain in his hand was gone. Completely. He looked down, and the blister, the raw flesh, the blood, all of it had vanished, leaving only smooth, unblemished skin. The dark wooden bracelet on his wrist felt warm now, humming with a gentle, rhythmic pulse, like a tiny second heart. Leo's breath hitched. His engineer's brain, usually a whirlwind of logic and calculation, ground to a screeching halt. He stood in a vast, empty expanse under a sky that wasn't a sky. It was a soft, pearlescent dome of light that bathed everything in a gentle, eternal twilight. The air was perfect, not just clean, perfect. The temperature was a constant, comfortable 72 degrees. It was the kind of air you'd pay $1,000 for in a high-end wellness spa, except this felt real. In the center of this impossible world, maybe 100 yards away, was the source of the warmth in his bracelet. It was a mound of earth, no larger than his truck, that pulsed with a soft, internal golden light. It wasn't just a pile of dirt, it was a living, breathing heart. A heart made of soil. As he watched, a tendril of golden light snaked out from it, coiled around a loose pebble, and gently drew it in. The pebble dissolved into the mound without a trace. This was the space. The space connected to the bracelet. His grandfather's old trinket wasn't just wood. Holy hell! Suddenly, another sensation prickled at the edge of his awareness. It wasn't sight or sound. It was a new sense, an amorphous feeling that spread out from him like a sonar ping. Life sense. He could feel things. Outside this space, he could feel the panicked, scurrying life signs of the few dozen people scattered around Hollow Creek Valley. They felt like frantic, terrified sparks in the dark. He could feel the larger, slower life signs of the deer hiding in the woods. And he could feel the sputtering, angry, almost comically pathetic life sign of Dale Higgins, not 20 yards from his property line, a feeling tinged with the metallic tang of ruin. Dale was probably screaming at the sky as the acid rain turned his brand new corrugated tin roof into Swiss cheese. A low chuckle escaped Leo's lips. It started small, then grew into a full-throated, bordering on maniacal laugh. The sound echoed in the perfect stillness of the space. Resentment? Anger at his old boss? Bitterness? It all evaporated like dew in a desert sunrise, replaced by an intoxicating, delirious joy. He unclipped the cheap digital watch from his belt loop, a habit from work, and laid it on the ground. He focused on the second hand. Tick, tick, tick. He counted to 60, 1 minute, then he focused on his own breathing, on the rhythmic pulse from the bracelet. He let his mind drift, exploring the feeling of this space. It felt ancient, it felt powerful, it felt like potential. He waited what felt like a half hour, just walking the perimeter of the central mound, kicking at the rich soil, breathing the incredible air. He could get used to this. Oh, he could get used to this in a big, big way. Finally, he walked back to the watch. He picked it up. The second hand had just finished sweeping past the 12. 1 minute, exactly 1 minute had passed on the watch. Outside, 30 minutes in here, for every 1 minute out there. The realization hit him not like a ton of bricks, but like a tactical nuclear strike of pure, unadulterated opportunity. The world outside might be descending into chaos, but in here, he had the one resource that was now more valuable than gold, guns, or gasoline. He had time. His frantic laughter died down, replaced by a grin so wide it hurt his cheeks. The old world had chewed him up and spit him out. Fine, let it burn. The old world was for suckers, for corporate drones like Peterson and self-important little tyrants like Dale. This was the start of a new world. His world, my land, my rules, he whispered, the words tasting like prophecy. With a thought, a focused desire, he felt a pull. The world folded again, and he was standing back on his porch, the acrid smell of the chemical rain once again stinging his nostrils. The gentle drizzle had intensified into a steady downpour. A sizzling sound from the yard confirmed his suspicion about Dale's roof. Good. He looked at his hand. Still perfect. He looked at the bracelet. Just a piece of dark wood once more. But he knew the universe had just handed him a cheat code of cosmic proportions. Then, it happened. The single lamp post at the end of his dirt road flickered violently, once, twice, and then died with a pathetic pop. A moment later, a wave of guttural shouts and a few panicked screams echoed up from the direction of the small cluster of houses in the valley. The power grid was down. The first pillar of civilization had crumbled. The soft glow from the few other houses in view winked out one by one, plunging the entire valley into a profound, primal darkness, broken only by the sickly green glow of the clouds above. Leo felt a shiver, but it wasn't of fear. It was anticipation. His cell phone was dead. No signal. The internet was a ghost. The thin veneer of modern life had been stripped away in less than an hour. People would be panicking. They'd be trying to call for help, trying to understand. They'd be scared. They'd be stupid. And stupid, scared people were dangerous. But they were also predictable. He stepped inside, the screen door slamming shut against the end of the world. He ignored the chaos outside. It was just noise. He went to his grandfather's desk, pulled out a pen and a fresh legal pad. The time for reacting was over. The time for planning had begun. At the top of the page, he wrote down his entire life savings, the pathetic severance check included, $150,000. It had seemed like a failure's nest egg yesterday. Today, it was the war chest for a new god. His mind, now buzzing with adrenaline and purpose, worked faster than it ever had. His handwriting was a controlled, precise scrawl. The list: 1. Fuel, all of it. Diesel first, gasoline second. Fill every legally obtainable container. The old F-150 has 2 tanks. Buy dozens of jerry cans. The gas station in town has above-ground tanks. Priority 1, no fuel, no mobility. No mobility, no resources. 2. Seeds, every single kind. He circled this 3 times. Go to the big Agway co-op on the edge of town first. Corn, beans, squash, wheat, barley, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers. Leafy greens, herbs, anything and everything. His space, his earthen heart, felt like it was hungry. He was going to feed it. 3. Salt, not the fancy pink Himalayan crap. Industrial-grade bags of rock salt. Hundreds of pounds. For curing, preserving, tanning hides. It would be worth more than gold in a month. Sugar too, but salt was king. 4. Tools, non-electric. Axes, saws, hammers, wrenches, a full socket set, crowbars, shovels, post-hole diggers, a block and tackle. Things that worked with muscle and leverage. The tools of civilization building. 5. Power, solar panels, the whole stock from the local hardware store, and deep-cycle marine batteries. And a power inverter. He had the knowledge to set it up. He'd have light and power when the rest of the world was in the dark. A massive psychological and practical advantage. 6. Medical, antibiotics, suture kits, bandages, gauze, iodine, painkillers, everything the local pharmacy had over the counter, and he'd try to sweet-talk the old pharmacist, Mr. Henderson, into selling him some of the good stuff from behind the counter. 7. Containment, tarps, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, duct tape, zip ties, buckets, lots and lots of buckets. He stared at the list. It was a blueprint for survival. Nay, a blueprint for dominance. He could spend a week inside the space, a literal month and a half of his time, sorting and organizing everything he could buy in one frantic day. A faint crackling sound drew his attention. He'd forgotten about the old battery-powered radio in the kitchen. He flicked it on, twisting the dial. Static, 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 then a voice, strained and urgent, cut through. Repeat, this is an emergency broadcast from the National Guard. All citizens are advised to shelter in place. Do not go outside. The atmospheric event is producing unforeseen meteorological and electromagnetic consequences. All travel is discouraged. I repeat, stay in your homes. Help is on the way. Leo snorted. Help is on the way. The 4 biggest lies in the universe. He snapped the radio off. The government didn't have a clue. They were reacting. He was acting. Through his life sense, he could feel Dale Higgins's panic shifting. The fear for his roof was being replaced by a deeper, more primal terror now that the lights were out and the official-sounding voice on the radio was telling him to be scared. He could almost hear the man trying his dead phone, his fat fingers jabbing uselessly at the screen, trying to call his paper pusher son for answers that would never come. The mighty mayor of Hollow Creek was just another scared little man in the dark. The thought was deeply, wonderfully satisfying. It was time. Leo strode to the mudroom. He pulled on a pair of thick canvas work pants and a long-sleeved denim shirt. Over that, he donned a set of waterproof rain gear, the heavy-duty stuff, made of thick PVC. He pulled the hood up, wrapped a plastic garbage bag around his face like a makeshift balaclava, leaving only a slit for his eyes. He found a pair of clear safety goggles and cinched them down tight. He looked ridiculous, like a low-budget horror movie villain. He didn't care. The acid rain was real. He grabbed the keys to the F-150. The old truck was a relic, a gas-guzzling beast from a bygone era. But it was all mechanical. No sensitive AQ to get fried by an EMP. It was simple, it was reliable, it was beautiful. He opened the door and stepped out into the night. The rain sizzled on his plastic hood. The air smelled of ozone and ruin. A few doors down, a man was standing in his doorway, holding a flickering candle, staring out into the oppressive darkness with wide, terrified eyes. He saw Leo's strange silhouette moving towards the truck. Leo ignored him. He climbed into the cab, the engine turning over with a reassuringly loud, guttural roar that shattered the panicked silence of the valley. The headlights cut two perfect, white cones through the rain-swept darkness. As he shifted into gear and the truck lurched forward, he saw the neighbor's face, pale and confused in the momentary glare of the headlights. He saw other doors opening, drawn by the sound of the engine, the only sign of deliberate action in a world suddenly paralyzed by fear. He didn't slow down, he didn't wave, he didn't offer a single word of explanation or comfort. He stomped on the gas, the tires spitting gravel, and roared out of his driveway, leaving the scared, helpless people of Hollow Creek behind in his dust. They were yesterday's problem. Today, he was going shopping. The town of Hollow Creek was screaming. Not the kind of screaming you hear in a horror movie, sharp and terrified. This was a low, guttural, angry kind of screaming. The sound of 100 car horns blaring at once, of neighbors yelling at neighbors over a dented fender, of a mother shrieking because her kid dropped the last can of SpaghettiOs. It was the sound of civilization getting a migraine. It had been 2 days since the lights went out, and the thin veneer of politeness had been sandblasted away by fear and uncertainty. From the driver's seat of his F-150, Leo watched the chaos with the detached amusement of a scientist observing a petri dish of particularly stupid bacteria. The single grocery store in town, the Food and Stuff, was a war zone. People were literally fighting over cartons of eggs and jugs of milk that would be rotten in a day. They rammed their shopping carts into each other, their faces contorted with a primal greed he found fascinating. Idiots, he thought, a slow grin spreading across his face under the balaclava he still wore. Complete and utter morons. They were grabbing things that screamed, short-term. Instant noodles, potato chips, soda. They were thinking about their next meal. He was thinking about the next 10 years. His life sense was a buzzing, chaotic mess in the town square, a hornet's nest of panic. He used it like a sonar, finding the quiet spots, the eddies in the current of human stupidity. He ignored the main streets, navigating the truck through narrow back alleys he'd known since he was a kid. The ATMs were all dark, with hand-scrawled, "No cash" signs taped to the screens. The registers at the stores were useless. Cash was king, and a whole lot of people were discovering that their life savings, sitting inaccessible in some digital server farm that was likely now a smoking crater, amounted to exactly zero. Following a faint, almost non-existent hum of life, he found his first target. It was a dusty, forgotten warehouse behind the old cannery, a place most people didn't even know existed. A small, hand-painted sign read, "Hollow Creek Bulk Supply." His life sense told him one person was inside, a flickering candle of pure, unadulterated panic. He knocked. A pale, sweaty man in his 50s cracked the door open, eyes wide with terror. "We're closed." Leo pulled down his balaclava. "I'm not here for toilet paper," he said, his voice calm. He gestured to the back of the warehouse. "You supply the town with road salt in the winter, right? I want to buy your stock." The man blinked. "Salt? Son, the world's ending, and you want salt? How much you got?" Leo asked, ignoring the question. "I dunno, a few tons maybe? Couple hundred bags? I'll give you $5,000. Cash," Leo said, pulling a thick stack of 20s from his jacket. For all of it, the man's terror was instantly replaced by a different kind of light, raw, naked greed. 5 grand. For salt. It was probably more profit than he made in an entire winter. "You got a deal," he squeaked, practically snatching the money out of Leo's hand. It took Leo 3 trips, the F-150's suspension groaning under the weight, but he cleared the warehouse out. Every last 50-pound bag of industrial-grade rock salt. The owner, clutching his cash like a holy relic, just shook his head and muttered about all kinds of crazies as Leo drove away. Leo just smiled. In a month, one of those bags would be worth more than the man's whole warehouse. In 6 months, people would kill for it. His next stop was the grand prize, Barlow's Agway Co-op. Old Man Barlow was a town institution, which is to say he was a legendary, price-gouging scumbag that everyone hated but had to deal with. The Agway was on the edge of town, and as Leo expected, it was completely deserted. Who needed fertilizer when you couldn't even buy a loaf of bread? Leo pushed the door open, a little bell dinging cheerfully, a sound completely at odds with the end of the world. Barlow was sitting behind the counter, looking sourly at a pocket radio that was spitting static. He was a weasel of a man, with a greasy comb-over and shifty eyes that had been calculating profit margins for 60 years. He looked up as Leo entered, his expression one of pure annoyance. "What do you want, kid? Can't you see the world's gone to hell? I ain't got no food." "I'm not here for food, Mr. Barlow," Leo said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous store. He swept his arm out, a grand, theatrical gesture. "I'm here for everything else." Barlow squinted. "What do you mean, everything else?" "I mean," Leo said, walking down an aisle, tapping a bag of corn seed. "I want it all, every bag of seed you have. Corn, beans, tomatoes, carrots, wheat, everything." He moved to the next aisle. "And all the fertilizer, the compost, the peat moss." He pointed to the far wall. "And the tools, the shovels, the rakes, the post-hole diggers, the axes. All of them." Barlow stared at him as if he'd just announced he was the king of Mars. Then, a slow, ugly smile spread across his greasy face. He thought he understood. He was looking at a rich kid having some kind of mental breakdown, a doomsday prepper who was about 2 weeks too late to the party. "An absolute fool." "Well now," Barlow said, rubbing his hands together. "That's a mighty big order, son. In these uncertain times, you know, supply and demand, this stuff has become a premium." "I'm aware," Leo said, his face a mask of stone. "Give me a price." Barlow's little rat brain went into overdrive. He looked at the mountains of stock he'd assumed were now worthless. He could see a new boat, a retirement in Florida, if Florida still existed. He decided to shoot for the moon. If the kid balked, he could always negotiate down. For the whole lot, every last seed and shovel, it's gonna have to be. He paused for dramatic effect. $80,000. He said the number with a finality that dared Leo to argue. He expected haggling. He expected outrage. He did not expect Leo to unzip his heavy duffel bag, hoist it onto the counter, and tip it over. Stacks of cash, hundreds, 50s, 20s, tumbled out, forming a mountain of green paper next to the register. It was a beautiful, vulgar, glorious mess of money. Leo casually pushed a stack of $100 bills forward. "There's 90,000 there," Leo said, his voice flat. "The extra 10 is for you to help me load the truck." "Now." Old Man Barlow's jaw went slack. The sound of it hitting the floor was almost audible. His shifty eyes darted from the money to Leo's dead serious face and back again. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to process what was happening. Greed won. Greed always won with men like Barlow. Who cares if the kid was insane? The money was real. It was right there. "Why, yes sir," Barlow stammered, his entire demeanor changing from a smug predator to an obsequious little servant. "Right away, sir. Whatever you need." For the next 2 hours, the legendary Grump of Hollow Creek worked harder than he probably had in 20 years, his face flushed with exertion and avarice. He hauled bags of fertilizer and boxes of seeds, loading them with a speed and energy that defied his age. All the while, he kept glancing at the pile of cash on his counter, as if afraid it might vanish. As they loaded the last axe onto the groaning truck, a few townsfolk, drawn by the commotion, had gathered. They saw Leo's truck, piled high with farming supplies, and started laughing. "Look at that idiot," one of them yelled. "He's gonna grow tomatoes for the acid rain." "Hey buddy," another shouted, "can you grow us some toilet paper?" Leo ignored them. He looked at Barlow, who was panting and wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes still glued to his prize. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Barlow." Barlow just nodded dumbly, counting a stack of hundreds. "Crazy kid," he muttered to himself, but without any heat. "Goddamn crazy, but rich." Leo climbed into the cab. As he started the engine, he looked back at Barlow one last time, a tiny, knowing smile playing on his lips. The poor old fool. He was standing there, holding a pile of paper that would be utterly worthless in a week, maybe 2. And he had just traded it for the literal seeds of a new world. The future of human civilization, right there in the back of Leo's truck, sold for a pile of paper and a dose of smug satisfaction. The feeling was so good it was almost a physical high. He drove away, leaving the laughing mob and the newly rich, soon-to-be destitute old man Barlow behind. The taunts faded, replaced by the crackle of the radio he'd salvage. Repeat, exercise extreme caution. Individuals designated as crazies have been reported in rural and urban areas. These are not sick people. They are hyper-aggressive, irrational, and will attack on sight. Do not engage, shelter and defend. Help is. The signal dissolved into static. Leo snorted. The government was finally catching up, giving a name to the horrors. He'd sensed them with his life sense. Frenetic, wrong, life signs that felt like nails on a chalkboard. He also felt something else on the edge of his perception, a tight cluster of predatory, disciplined life signs holed up in the old sporting goods store. They felt like wolves circling. A new gang was forming. He filed the information away. Another problem for another day. Back at his valley fortress, the silence was a blessing. He spent the next few hours in a state of controlled frenzy. He didn't just unload the truck. With a thought, he would open a connection to his sanctuary space, and simply heave the bags and boxes through the shimmering portal that appeared in his basement. Bags of fertilizer, boxes of seeds, tons of salt, stacks of tools. They all vanished from the real world, neatly deposited onto the rich, dark soil inside his private dimension. His basement, once cluttered, was now empty, ready for the next haul. His work for the day outside was done, but his real work was just beginning. With a focused will, he folded himself out of reality and into his sanctuary. The perfect, still air washed over him, cleansing the stench of fear and decay from his mind. He walked to the center of his world, to the gently pulsing mound of earth, the earthen heart. All his treasures were there, piled in neat, impossible stacks. He felt like a king surveying his hoard. He reached into a box of seeds from Barlow's and pulled out a handful of rice grains. Grains that would become the bland, nutrient-poor rice of the old world. Then he reached into another box and pulled out a handful of simple vegetable seeds. He knelt before the earthen heart. He was a city boy, an engineer who designed hydroponic systems, but this felt right. This felt primal. He pushed the rice grains into the glowing, loamy soil. He planted the vegetable seeds. He could feel the heart accept them, tendrils of golden light wrapping around each one, beginning its work of purification and enhancement. Then, he remembered, in the chaos of loading up, he'd grabbed a small, unmarked wooden box on Barlow's exotics shelf, mostly on a whim. He opened it now. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, strange seed. It was the size of a marble, jet black, and unnaturally smooth, seeming to drink the light around it. It felt cool to the touch. It had no label, no description. It was a complete mystery. A wild, crazy grin spread across Leo's face. In a world of chaos, what was one more unknown? With a reverence that surprised him, he took the strange black seed and gently pushed it into the very center of the earthen heart. "All right," he whispered to the silent, perfect world around him. "Show me what you've got." The heart pulsed, a little stronger this time, and a deep, golden light enveloped the spot where the black seed lay. The future was officially in the ground, and he couldn't wait to see what grew. 10 days. It had been 10 days since the world had a seizure and forgot how to function. 10 days since the sky had wept acid. Outside Leo's fortress, the rain had stopped, but the air hung thick and sour, a chemical cocktail that stung the nostrils and coated the back of your throat. It was the smell of rotting garbage, rotting hope, rotting civilization. The chorus of Hollow Creek had changed from panicked shouting to the low, miserable wails of the starving. It was a symphony of empty bellies and emptier futures. Inside, however, the air smelled of heaven. The rich, nutty aroma of freshly cooked rice wafted from the kitchen, a scent so wholesome and out of place it felt like a violation of the New World's laws. This wasn't the bland, dusty stuff from a box. This was the first harvest of his Crimson Vigor rice, grown in the golden light of the earthen heart. 30 days of accelerated growth inside his sanctuary space. For every one day that passed outside meant he was already 100 harvests ahead of the rest of humanity, give or take. Not that there was a rest of humanity to compete with anymore. As Leo took his first bite, a wave of warmth spread from his stomach through every limb, a clean, potent energy that felt less like food and more like a high-grade fuel injection. His muscles, already toned from days of hard labor, tightened and buzzed with a newfound density. The exhaustion that had been clinging to him like a shroud evaporated. He felt strong, unnaturally so. He glanced at his hand, clenching it into a fist. It felt like he could punch a hole through the oak table without much effort. A giddy, slightly unhinged grin spread across his face. This rice wasn't just food, it was a performance-enhancing drug cooked up by God himself. He felt a new connection thrumming just beneath his skin, a faint echo of his life sense but different, more active. He focused on a small, dusty potted plant someone had left on the windowsill ages ago. Wiggle, he thought, a spark of playful command in his mind. The pathetic little plant shivered, its dry leaves rustling as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. Lean left. It tilted awkwardly to the left. Now do a little dance. It rustled and shook in a clumsy, spastic rhythm. Leo burst out laughing, a loud, genuine laugh that echoed in the silent house. Flora control, an active, conscious ability. It was weak, for now, only affecting the most basic plants. But combined with the super specimens he was growing in his sanctuary, the possibilities were intoxicating. Speaking of which, the strange, black seed he'd planted on a whim had sprouted. And oh, what a sprout it was! He'd named it the armored beetlewood tree. Its trunk wasn't bark, it was a segmented, chitinous-looking material that gleamed with a dark, metallic luster. When he'd chopped one down in the sanctuary, the axe had rung like it was striking steel. The wood was dense, heavy, and ridiculously strong. So, he had spent the last couple of days in the real world working. Every window, every door in his house was now reinforced with thick plates of this beetlewood. It looked bizarre, like some H.R. Giger-inspired home renovation, but he doubted a sledgehammer, let alone a desperate neighbor's axe, could do more than scratch it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was jarring, an intrusion from the miserable world outside. Leo's good mood didn't falter. He simply walked over to a tablet he'd set up on the coffee table, a relic of the old world powered by a solar battery bank he'd presciently hoarded. The camera feed flickered to life, showing his front porch. And there they were. The vultures had arrived. His uncle, Dave, a pot-bellied man who'd always looked at Leo with a mixture of pity and contempt for not getting a real job in the city. His aunt, Carol, a woman whose face was permanently pinched in a look of disapproval, and whose primary mode of communication was gossip. And between them, their precious son, Kevin, a lanky teenager who probably couldn't figure out how to open a can without a YouTube tutorial. They looked like hell. Their clothes were dirty, their faces gaunt, their skin a sallow, unhealthy gray. Pathetic. Leo, son, are you in there? Uncle Dave's voice was hoarse, but it dripped with a forced, syrupy warmth that set Leo's teeth on edge. It's your Uncle Dave. We know you're in there, we saw you fixing the place up. Leo leaned back in his comfortable sofa, took another mouthful of the miraculous rice, and unmuted the microphone for the external speaker. What do you want, Dave? His voice boomed out onto the porch, cold and emotionless. Aunt Carol shoved her husband aside, her shrill voice cutting through the air. Is that any way to talk to your family, Leo? We're all in this together now. Blood is thicker than water. We're starving out here, and you're all locked up in your grandfather's big house. You have to help us. It's your duty. Leo almost choked on his rice from laughing. Duty. Blood. The sheer, unmitigated audacity was a marvel to behold. He remembered with crystal clarity the year his father got sick, how his parents had begged this same uncle and aunt for a loan to cover medical bills. He remembered Dave's exact words. That's a bad investment, Tom. We have to look out for our own future. He remembered Carol whispering loudly about how his parents should have saved more responsibly. Oh, this is going to be fun, Leo thought, a wicked gleam in his eye. He got up from the sofa. With a casual flick of his wrist, he produced a small, portable butane stove from his sanctuary and placed it on the coffee table. He then produced a pot, some broth, a platter of thinly sliced, beautifully marbled beef from a calf he'd purified, and a basket of vibrant green vegetables harvested just minutes ago. The little stove hissed to life. He set up the pot, and soon, the rich, savory scent of boiling hot pot began to join the aroma of rice. He made sure the window fan was on, blowing the glorious scent directly towards the front porch. Through the camera, he watched their reactions. Their eyes went wide, their nostrils flared. Kevin, the precious son, started openly drooling, his stomach letting out an audible growl. Uncle Dave swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Leo picked up a slice of beef with his chopsticks, dipped it into the bubbling broth for a few seconds until it was perfectly cooked, then dipped it in a savory sauce. He brought it to his lips, his voice broadcasting clearly through the speakers. Hungry? He asked, his tone deceptively casual. Pull up a patch of dirt. Let's eat and talk. He then proceeded to eat the most decadent, soul-destroying meal a starving person could possibly witness. Slice after slice of tender beef. Crisp, fresh bok choy. Plump mushrooms. He ate slowly, deliberately, savoring every bite, all while his actions were displayed on the tablet for him, and their oral and olfactory evidence tortured the family outside. Kevin broke first. Dad, he has food. He has so much food. The boy wailed, starting to cry. I'm so hungry. Leo, please. Carol begged, her voice cracking, all pretense of superiority gone. Just a little something. For the boy. He's your cousin. Leo finished his mouthful, took a slow sip of clean, filtered water, and leaned into the microphone. His voice was no longer casual. It was as cold and hard as the beetlewood on his door. I remember when my dad needed money for his chemo, Carol. I remember you saying you had to protect your family's future. Well, I learned a valuable lesson from you both that day. He let the silence hang for a moment, thick with the smell of his feast. I'm protecting my future now. The one you said was a bad investment. Now, get the hell off my property before I decide to plant something new in my garden. The silence that followed was heavy. The family on the porch stared at the door, their expressions shifting from covetous hunger to shock, then to ugly, venomous hatred. The mask of civility had been ripped away, revealing the grasping, selfish monsters beneath. Uncle Dave's face turned a blotchy red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Leo clicked off the speaker, muted the microphone, and went back to his meal. He felt nothing, no guilt, no pity. Just a cold, clean satisfaction. The world had ended, old rules, old obligations, they were all just ash now. His land, his rules, that was the only law that mattered. As he ate, he switched on the salvaged radio, turning the dial until he found the faint, crackling broadcast from a military channel. Repeat, civilian government structures in the tri-state area are confirmed to be non-operational. All remaining federal assets are being consolidated. Designated, safe zones, have been established at Fort Dix and survivors are advised to make their way. Exercise extreme caution. So, it was official. The clowns in charge had finally admitted they weren't in charge anymore. It also meant a new kind of social order was forming. A more primal one. He'd already heard rumors. Big Mike, a local thug who used to run a shoddy auto repair shop, had gathered a dozen of the town's biggest loudmouths. They weren't protecting anyone, they were shaking down the weak for their last cans of beans, calling themselves the Hollow Creek Guard. Leo had no doubt that sooner or later, their greedy eyes would fall on his silent, fortified house. Another problem for another day. He'd deal with Big Mike when the time came. A commotion from outside drew his attention back to the camera feed. His uncle's family hadn't left. Of course they hadn't. The humiliation and the tantalizing smell of food had cooked their desperation into pure, unadulterated rage. Uncle Dave, his face contorted in a mask of fury, was pointing a shaking finger at Leo's front door. But he wasn't yelling at the door anymore. He was yelling at the handful of other gaunt, desperate villagers who had been drawn by the smell and the shouting. He's in there, Dave roared, his voice raw with malice. My own nephew, he's got a mountain of food in there. He's got everything, and he's just sitting on it, watching us starve. He turned, his eyes wild, and screamed at the gathering crowd, his words a torch thrown into a tinderbox. He wants us to die, while he feasts. Are we going to let him do that? That house belongs to this town. That food belongs to us. The stench of desperation had an audience. Leo watched them on his tablet, a grim little amphitheater playing out on his front lawn. Uncle Dave, the grand orator of this particular tragedy, was really getting into it. His face was a blotchy mess of performative rage, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed and preached his gospel of entitled jealousy. The crowd, a motley crew of about 30 hollow-eyed villagers, ate it up. They were hungry, scared, and stupid, a dangerous cocktail. What's worse, the creek, their main source of water, had started running with a weird, milky green tint since yesterday. A few people who'd chanced it were now curled up in their homes, groaning with gut-wrenching cramps. Fear was the gasoline, and Uncle Dave was holding the match. Leading the charge now was Big Mike, the former auto mechanic turned post-apocalyptic warlord. The man was built like a rusty refrigerator and had the IQ of one to match. He'd found a bullhorn somewhere, and he held it like it was the scepter of a king. Leo, we know you're in there, you hoarding son of a bitch. Mike's amplified voice scraped across the valley. "This is a community. We share. You open this door right now and give us our fair share of supplies, or we're coming in to take it." Leo chuckled, swirling the last of his freshly filtered water in a clean glass. "Our fair share?" The audacity was almost impressive. He switched the camera view to a wider angle. A few of the younger, dumber guys in Mike's little, hollow creek guard were hefting sledgehammers. They looked tough, or at least they were trying to. "You got 5 minutes, Leo," Big Mike roared. "Then the door comes down." Leo set his glass down. He didn't even bother with his own speaker. Talking to them was a waste of breath. He walked calmly to the second-floor balcony that overlooked the front yard, staying in the shadows of the house. He could see them all clearly, the snarling rage on Big Mike's face, the greedy glint in his uncle's eyes, the sheep-like anxiety of the rest. They were a pathetic little mob, a symptom of a dying world. He felt the familiar thrum under his skin, the connection to the life force around him. His life sense had been a passive radar, but since eating the Crimson Vigor rice, it felt different. It was like he'd been given a keyboard and mouse for a program he could previously only watch. Time for a little botany lesson. Two of the sledgehammer goons, buoyed by the mob's cheers, rushed the low beetlewood fence he'd built. They swung their hammers with grunts of effort. Clang! The sound was not the splintering of wood but the jarring ring of metal on metal. The hammers bounced off the dark, chitinous fence posts, sending vibrations shuddering up the goons' arms. They stared at their hands, then at the fence, their dumb expressions a perfect blend of confusion and pain. The crowd's cheering faltered. From his perch in the shadows, Leo smirked. Now for the opening act. He focused his will on the ground beneath the two would-be heroes. He didn't need special seeds for this part. The old, gnarled roots of the oak trees lining his property would do just fine. Rise! The ground swelled. With a sound of tearing earth and snapping soil, thick, woody roots, like the gnarled fingers of a buried giant, erupted from the dirt. They weren't fast or aggressive. They just appeared, wrapping around the goons' ankles with uncompromising strength. The two men yelped in surprise before crashing face first into the mud, their sledgehammers flying from their grasp. They thrashed and kicked, but the roots held them firm, like naughty children put in a timeout by Mother Nature herself. A wave of fear washed over the crowd. This wasn't normal. Shouts turned into gasps. People took a hesitant step back. Big Mike lowered his bullhorn, his jaw slack. "What in the hell?" he muttered. Leo decided it was time for the headliner. He reached into his sanctuary space, his hand closing around one of the ripe fruits from the armored beetlewood tree. It was the size of a grapefruit, a dark, segmented pod that felt warm to the touch. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it high into the air. It sailed in a perfect arc, landing with a soft thud right in the middle of the crowd. For a second, nothing happened. The villagers stared at the weird black pod, confused. Then, with a series of sharp cracks, the pod split open. It wasn't a goo or a gas that came out. It was a cloud, a living, buzzing, swirling cloud of black. Hundreds upon hundreds of chitinous beetles, each the size of a man's thumb, poured out. Their wings beat the air with a low, menacing hum, a sound like 1,000 tiny drones taking flight. They didn't bite, they didn't sting, they simply swarmed. The effect was pure, primal terror. The black cloud enveloped the crowd, blotting out the gray sky. People screamed, swatting at the air, their flailing hands hitting nothing but the hard shells of the beetles. The insects swirled around their heads, a vortex of clicking, buzzing dread. They crawled into hair and down collars, their little legs tickling and terrifying in equal measure. Panic, absolute and mindless, took over. The mob dissolved. It wasn't a retreat, it was a rout. They dropped their shovels, their bats, their misplaced courage. They trampled each other in a desperate scramble to get away from the buzzing nightmare. Big Mike, the brave leader, was among the first to run, squealing like a piglet as a beetle got tangled in his greasy hair. Leo watched the chaos with cold satisfaction. He saw his uncle, Dave, stumble and fall. A dark, wet stain spread across the front of his trousers as he scrambled back to his feet, crying openly as he fled. The beetle swarm, their job done, coalesced back into a tight ball, flew up onto the roof of the house, and settled into a dormant, glittering cluster. The silence they left behind was profound, broken only by the whimpering of the two idiots still tangled in the roots. Leo finally stepped forward into the light on his balcony. He picked up the external microphone he had set up. His voice, amplified and utterly devoid of warmth, boomed over the now empty lawn. My land, my rules. The two men on the ground flinched as if struck. Step on it again. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper that still carried with chilling clarity, and I'll plant you in it. He clicked off the mic. A moment later, the roots receded back into the earth as smoothly as they had appeared, leaving the two men lying in the mud, trembling and sobbing. They didn't need a second invitation. They half crawled, half staggered to their feet and ran for their lives. Problem solved. For now, Leo knew that fear was a temporary solution. He needed a permanent one. He went back inside, grabbed a handful of new seeds from the earthen heart space, and walked the perimeter of his fence line. These were the seeds of the whiplash vines. He pushed them into the soft soil at the base of the beetlewood fence. Fueled by his intent and the latent energy from the space, they germinated almost instantly. He could feel them taking root, their life force eagerly connecting with his. Thin, green tendrils, tough as steel cable, snaked out from the ground, weaving themselves into the fence and hiding amongst the existing bushes. They lay dormant, perfectly camouflaged, a living defense system waiting for a command. His fortress had just grown teeth. Later that afternoon, a new sound cut through the silence. The low rumble of heavy engines. Leo checked his cameras. A convoy of 3 olive-drab military trucks was lumbering down the main road at the edge of the valley. They didn't stop. They weren't here to save anyone. But as they passed, a message blared from a loudspeaker, distorted by static and distance. Repeat, all civilian government structures. Non-operational. Make your way to designated safe zones. Exercise extreme caution. Reports of aggressive wildlife mutations are confirmed. Unidentified canine, size of a calf, sighted near. Forests are no longer safe. Repeat, the forests are no longer safe. The message faded as the trucks disappeared over the horizon. Leo absorbed the information. So, it was official. The big boys had packed it in. And the local fauna was getting an upgrade. He'd already suspected as much. Survival of the fittest had just become the law of the land, enforced by nature itself. Miles away, in what was left of the nearby town, Big Mike was nursing his wounded pride and a nasty bump on his head. He sat in his grimy auto shop, surrounded by the remnants of his guard. The fear had subsided, replaced by a venomous, impotent rage. Some kind of trick, he spat, spitting on the concrete floor. Smoke and mirrors. Freaky bugs. But the roots, Mike, one of his cronies mumbled, still pale. And that fence, it's not normal. Big Mike slammed his fist on a rusty oil drum. I don't care if it's black magic. Nobody makes a fool out of Big Mike. That bastard is sitting on a gold mine, and we're gonna take it. He looked at the scared faces around him. These chumps were useless. He couldn't storm that house of horrors with a bunch of starving villagers. He needed real muscle. He needed maniacs. A nasty grin spread across his face. Time to make a call, he said, a new, dangerous idea taking root in his dim brain. I hear the vultures are looking for new business opportunities. In a completely different corner of this broken world, the air smelled of stale perfume and decay. Amelia Vance sat perfectly still behind a massive mahogany desk in a penthouse office that overlooked the skeletal remains of the city. Her business suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the grime and chaos visible through the shattered floor-to-ceiling window. Her face was a mask of cold composure, but her mind was racing. Across from her, a man named Rex, her former head of security, was leaning against the doorframe, a smug, contemptuous smirk on his face. He'd been so loyal, so professional, until the paychecks stopped. You see, Ms. Vance, Rex said, his voice oozing with false politeness, in the new world, loyalty is a commodity. And a new buyer made me a better offer. The buyer stepped out from the shadows of the adjoined room. He was a grimy, hulking man with a shaved head and a tattoo of a spiderweb covering one side of his face. His name was Scab, and he was the leader of a local scavenger gang. He didn't look at her with the respect a CEO was accustomed to. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at a lamb. His eyes, full of raw, predatory hunger, roamed over her body, making her skin crawl. Rex tells me you're smart, Scab grunted, his voice a gravelly rumble. And you know where the other corporate holdouts are. Food, medicine, generators. You're gonna take us there. He took a step closer, his foul breath washing over her. And after that, you're gonna be a great asset for morale. Amelia didn't flinch. She kept her gaze level, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. She had managed a billion-dollar portfolio, stared down hostile takeovers, and crushed her rivals in the boardroom. But this was a different kind of negotiation, one where the currency was survival and the penalty for failure was unthinkable. Her mind, a supercomputer of logic and probabilities, raced through every scenario, analyzing every variable, every possible move. And in all of them, the outcome was grim. It had been a month, 35 days since the world collectively shit the bed. And me? I was doing great. Let me paint you a picture. Outside, the world was gray and dying. Inside my little fortress, it smelled like fresh soil, clean water, and grilled steak. I'd installed the loom shrooms in the main living areas. They weren't just lights, they were an entire vibe. They pulsed with a soft, ethereal blue-green glow that made the whole house feel like a submarine lounge from some fancy sci-fi movie. The low-frequency light had a weirdly calming effect, like a dose of natural Xanax. After a long day of, well, existing, kicking back in that tranquil glow was better than any spa day the old world had to offer. But comfort breeds complacency, and I wasn't about to get soft. The pantry was full of god-tier Crimson Vigor rice and preserved super veggies, but my inner hoarder, the little goblin in my brain that screamed for more, was getting antsy. I needed stuff the seed vault couldn't just grow. I'm talking about raw materials. Metals, industrial chemicals, technical manuals, anything I could feed to the elemental forge or use to jerry-rig new projects. It was time for a shopping trip. The biggest problem wasn't the monsters or the crazies. It was the fog. A new flavor of apocalypse had rolled in a few weeks back. A thick, soupy magnetic fog that descended most mornings. It didn't choke you or poison you, it just confused you. Compasses spun like kids on a sugar high. Old-school GPS units, the few that might have survived the initial EMP, were completely useless. Get caught in that soup without knowing the terrain like the back of your hand, and you could walk in circles until you starved or something found you. Lucky for me, I had a better navigation system. I stood on the balcony, overlooking the quiet valley. I closed my eyes and focused, reaching into the sanctuary. On the roof, the dormant cluster of chitinous black beetles stirred. A moment later, 100 of them took to the air, not in a terrifying swarm, but in a precise, grid-like pattern. They flew low and fast toward the decrepit town 5 miles down the road. This was a new trick I'd been practicing. By assimilating the beetles through the sanctuary, I could tap into their senses. It wasn't like watching 100 tiny TV screens. It was weirder, cooler. The data fed directly into my brain, building a real-time, 3-dimensional wireframe map of the environment. Buildings, cars, obstacles, and life forms. It was like having a God mode cheat enabled. I watched the mental map take shape. The town was a graveyard of abandoned cars and looted storefronts. Pathetic. I could see the heat signatures of the insane, scattered around like glitches in the Matrix. Some of them were different now. Lankier, faster. Every so often, one would throw its head back and let out a piercing shriek that my beetle drones registered as a high-frequency spike. The townsfolk who hadn't run or died had taken to calling them screamers. Cute. Another reason not to get cornered. My swarm scan swept over a squat, 3-story office building near the town's ruined center. The library I wanted to hit was on the ground floor, but my mental map lit up with a cluster of life signs that weren't the erratic spikes of the insane. These were steady, clustered together on the top floor. About a dozen of them, one group huddled in a room, the others blocking the only exit. A hostage situation, or, more likely, the New World's version of a corporate takeover. Curiosity piqued, I directed a dozen beetles to crawl through a shattered window on the 3rd floor. The image clarified in my mind, a scene of pure, uncut human awfulness. A group of 7 or 8 survivors, mostly women and a couple of older men, were backed into a corner. They looked terrified, starved. Facing them was a pack of hyenas walking on 2 legs. One of them, a big slab of filth with a spiderweb tattoo on his face, was clearly the leader. Scab. I recognized the name from some of the desperate radio chatter I'd picked up. His crew, the Vultures, were known for being particularly nasty pieces of work. They were armed with makeshift pipe guns and rusty machetes, and they wore their cruelty like a badge of honor. "Look, we've given you all the food we had," a man with glasses pleaded, his voice trembling. Scab just laughed, a horrible, gravelly sound. He took a step forward, his eyes landing on one of the women. She was different from the others. While everyone else was shaking, openly weeping, or staring at the floor, she just stood there. Her business suit was torn and filthy, but she wore it like armor. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes sharp and analytical, darting between the thugs, assessing. Even cornered and helpless, she radiated an aura of defiance. "We're not just here for the cans of beans, old man," Scab sneered, his gaze licking over the woman. "The world's over. We need to start thinking about rebuilding morale." His men chuckled like the brain-dead sycophants they were. The woman didn't flinch. Her name, I'd find out later, was Amelia Vance, a former CEO. And right now, she was calculating odds in a game she was about to lose horribly. My internal goblin rubbed its hands together. This was an opportunity, not a rescue mission. I don't do charity. This was a potential acquisition. That woman had value. The rest? Scared cattle. Time to intervene, but not with guns and glory. That was messy. No, I preferred horticulture. I kept my distance, hiding in the shell of a burned-out bakery across the street. Reaching into the sanctuary, my fingers brushed past the whiplash vine seeds and found what I was looking for. A small, almost unnoticeable variant that my resident mad scientist, a lovely woman named Dr. Anya Petrova, had helped me cultivate. Parasite creeper seeds, tiny, hard, and gray, like bits of gravel. With a practiced flick, I launched a dozen of them into the air. They sailed across the street, landing silently against the grimy brick wall of the office building. The moment they touched the surface, I pushed a sliver of my will into them. Grow. Fueled by my energy, they germinated instantly. No slow-motion nature documentary stuff here. This was apocalypse speed botany. Thin, gray tendrils, almost invisible against the concrete, shot up the wall like spiders on meth. They weren't green and vibrant, they were the color of dust and shadows. They flowed through broken window panes, crept along ceiling tiles, and slithered down walls, silent and unnoticed by the drama-filled room. My beetle cam gave me the perfect god's eye view. Scab was getting impatient. He gestured at two of his goons. "Grab the pretty one, let's show her the new company policy." The two thugs grinned, stepping forward. Amelia's jaw tightened, her hands clenching into fists. It was the last stand of a cornered lioness. And this is where things got fun. Now, the parasite creepers exploded into action. From the ceiling, from the walls, from the floor, dozens of gray tendrils shot out like striking snakes. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Before a single vulture could even process what was happening, the vines were on them. They wrapped around wrists, ankles, and necks with the speed and precision of surgical robots. One moment, Scab's men were a pack of arrogant predators. The next, they were human puppets. The two goons who had been approaching Amelia were jerked off their feet, yelping in shock as vines tightened around their throats, silencing them. Scab managed a choked gasp before a thick tendril coiled around his neck and hoisted him into the air, his pipe gun clattering to the floor. The rest of his crew met the same fate. Within 3 seconds, the entire vulture gang was hanging from the ceiling like grotesque Christmas ornaments, kicking and struggling, their faces turning a lovely shade of purple. The other survivors just stared, their terror instantly replaced by dumbfounded shock. I gave them a minute to appreciate the art installation, then strolled into the building. I walked past the dangling, choking thugs without a second glance. The air was filled with the soft, wet sounds of their panicked gurgles. Music to my ears. I stopped in front of Amelia. The other survivors flinched away from me like I was the devil himself. She didn't. She just watched me, those sharp, intelligent eyes taking in my clean clothes, my calm demeanor, and the absolute chaos hanging from the ceiling. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't offer comforting words. I made a business proposal. "I saw the calmness in your eyes," I said, my voice level. "You're not like them." I nodded my head toward the weeping survivors. "You're a fighter, a thinker. That has value." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Follow me. You'll have food, clean water, and safety. In return, you'll work for me." I then glanced at the others, who were now looking at me with a pathetic glimmer of hope. My next words snuffed it out completely. "As for the rest of you, you're on your own. Good luck." A man sputtered, You can't just leave us." I turned my head slowly, giving him a look so cold it could have flash froze a volcano. The vines holding Scab tightened slightly, and a fresh wave of choking sounds filled the room. The man shut his mouth. I looked back at Amelia. "Your call." The offer's on the table for the next 10 seconds. She didn't even take two. There was no hesitation, no pleading for her former companions. She had been a CEO. She understood leverage, assets, and cutting losses. In this moment, she saw me not as a savior, but as a new, unfathomable power in a world where the old ones had died. And she knew a winning investment when she saw one. I accept, she said, her voice steady, though I could see the profound shock warring with pragmatism in her eyes. Good choice, I said. I turned to leave. What about them? She asked, nodding toward the vultures. I smirked. They're going to be fertilizer. I didn't need to give an order. The vines understood my intent. As we walked out of the room, the sounds of choking and struggling abruptly stopped, replaced by a series of sickening, wet crunches. The elemental forge was always hungry. Amelia walked beside me, not flinching. Yes, I had made a good choice. The journey back was quiet. I handed her a bottle of purified water and a bar of compressed protein I'd made from dried beetlewood fruit. She drank the water like it was the finest champagne and ate the bar with a methodical focus that told me everything I needed to know about her will to live. When we reached my valley, the sun was beginning to set. The magnetic fog had burned off, leaving the air crisp and clean. As we approached the reinforced beetlewood gate, she looked at the formidable, almost alien-looking fence line and the quietly humming perimeter. "What is this place?" she breathed, her voice filled with awe. I just smiled. Home. I placed my hand on the gate. It swung open silently, revealing the world within. The soft, blue-green glow of the loom shrooms spilled out from the windows of my house, painting the manicured lawn in tranquil light. The air smelled of life, of growing things, of civilization. Amelia stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw, which had remained firm in the face of death, finally dropped. The mask of the cold, calculating CEO shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. She stared from the thriving, impossible oasis before her, and then back at me, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. She had thought she was making a deal with a powerful survivor. She was only now beginning to realize she had just pledged her loyalty to the god of this new, broken world. Watching a high-powered CEO reboot is a fascinating process. I gave Amelia Vance, my new acquisition, a guest room that had cleaner sheets than most five-star hotels probably had left. I left her a bottle of purified water and a change of clothes, simple sweats and a t-shirt, all I had spare. Then I just let her be. The next morning, I was in my kitchen, enjoying the absurd luxury of a fresh brewed cup of coffee, when she emerged. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Not a scary, ectoplasm-dripping ghost, but the ghost of a world that had vanished a month ago. She ran a hand over the smooth, clean kitchen counter. She stared at the loom shroom in the ceiling, which was pulsing with its gentle, calming blue light. Her eyes, which had been daggers of defiance the day before, were wide with a kind of fragile disbelief. "This isn't a dream?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The sound was rough, as if she hadn't used it for anything but screaming or bargaining for a while. "Nope, reality is just better on my side of the fence," I said, sliding a mug of black coffee across the counter to her. "Welcome to the new C-suite. The benefits package is killer." She took the mug like it was a holy relic, her hands trembling slightly as she brought it to her lips. She took a sip, and her eyes closed. I swear I saw a single tear trace a clean line through the grime still on her cheek. It was the first real, unprocessed food or drink she'd probably had in weeks. To her, this wasn't just coffee. It was proof of life. I let her have her moment, then I gave her the grand tour. Which was basically just me showing off. I'm not gonna lie, it felt good. "This," I said, swinging open the door to my main pantry, "is the grocery store." Her jaw, which had been slowly rehinging itself, dropped right back to the floor. Shelves. Rows and rows of shelves, groaning under the weight of produce that shouldn't exist. Bright red tomatoes that pulsed with a faint inner light, cucumbers the size of my forearm, potatoes that looked like polished riverstones. And the rice. Huge sacks of my Crimson Vigor rice, stacked in a corner, exuding a faint, energizing warmth. "How?" she breathed. "Good fertilizer," I said with a shrug. A little bit of a lie, a whole lot of the truth. I led her to the processing room, which used to be the garage. Here, the vibe was less farmer's market, and more mad scientist's workshop. I had my elemental forge humming quietly in one corner, a sleek obsidian altar that occasionally belched out a puff of odorless gray smoke. Piles of neatly separated elements, iron, copper, carbon, were stacked in bins beside it. I pointed to the remains of a rusted-out pickup truck bed I'd dragged in last week. "That's the incinerator. Takes garbage, spits out Legos." Then I showed her the armory. It wasn't guns and bullets. It was stranger. Jars filled with what looked like popcorn kernels. Dead corn, I explained. Genetically engineered to be a little explosive. Toss 'em, they go boom. Equivalent of a flashbang. Next to them were seed packets for the whiplash vines and the parasite creepers she'd already had the pleasure of meeting. In another bin, dried, razor-sharp husks from the beetlewood trees were stacked like throwing stars. She just stared, her mind, which I was beginning to suspect was her greatest asset, trying to categorize the impossible. After an hour, we were back in the living room. I was feeling pretty smug. I'd shown her the food, the weapons, the resources. I was the king of my little castle, the god of this green valley. And then she shattered my ego. She'd been quiet, just observing, a small frown creasing her brow. She looked at the piles of raw materials in the garage, then at the overflowing pantry, then back at me. "You have no system," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a flat statement of fact, delivered with the kind of brutal honesty only a CEO can muster. I blinked. "What do you mean? I have plenty of systems. The water pump works, the lights are on. That's infrastructure, not a system," she corrected me, her voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. "You're a producer, a one-man production miracle, but you're managing your assets like a doomsday prepper in his mom's basement." Ouch. But she was right. "You're stockpiling," she continued, gesturing around the room. "Which is fine for stage 1. But you're not planning. This," she pointed to a stack of incredibly valuable beetlewood logs I was using as a coffee table, "is an asset being used at 5% of its potential efficiency. This," she gestured to the pantry, "is a logistical nightmare waiting to happen. What's your inventory? What's your consumption rate? What are your projected needs for the next quarter?" I just stared at her. Quarter? Lady, I was happy if I knew what I was having for dinner tomorrow. My master plan so far had been, grow stuff, kill bad guys, don't die. She saw the blank look on my face and sighed. It was the sigh of a genius being forced to explain basic arithmetic. "Do you have a pen? And a notebook? Any paper will do." I rummaged through an old desk and found a dusty spiral notebook and a half-dead ballpoint pen. I handed them to her. And then the magic happened. She sat down at the dining table, took a deep breath, and started writing. Her entire demeanor changed. The shell-shocked survivor vanished. The calculating, cornered executive from yesterday was gone too. This was someone new. She entered a state of pure, unadulterated focus. Her eyes, which had the Turing test saying in her Bible, now seemed to glow with an inner light of their own. Her pen didn't just write, it flowed. Numbers, charts, diagrams, bullet points. The only sound in the room for the next 3 hours was the furious scratching of pen on paper and the soft hum of the loom shrooms. I half expected to see smoke start curling from her ears. When she was done, she leaned back, looking exhausted but satisfied. She'd filled half the notebook. She slid it across the table to me. On the first page, in sharp, precise handwriting, was the title. The Green Zone Mandate, a 5-stage development and operational plan. I started reading, and my world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a plan, it was a damn Bible for building a new civilization from scratch. Stage 1, Fortification and Optimization. She'd detailed a full patrol schedule for my beetle drones, not just random sweeps but overlapping grids. She'd calculated the exact number of whiplash vines needed to create a layered, multi-zone defense around the entire property. She even drew up a plan to reroute a small creek to create a moat, complete with a new species of genetically modified piranha that I hadn't even told her I was working on. How did she know? Stage 2, Energy and Resource Management. This section made my head spin. She'd created a full inventory system based on my rambling tour. She calculated the exact energy output of the loom shrooms versus their biological upkeep costs. She proposed a closed-loop water system using a specific type of algae to cut down on energy I used for pumping and purification. It was brilliant. Stage 3, Production Expansion. She outlined a plan to start cultivating specific crops not just for food, but for trade. Her logic was terrifyingly simple. In a world without currency, the one who controls the food supply controls the economy. We won't just survive, we will become the new Federal Reserve. Stage 4, Human Resources Acquisition. This was the part that got me. She wasn't just talking about rescuing people. She was talking about targeted recruitment. We need engineers, doctors, soldiers. We will vet them, test them. Your beetle drones are the perfect surveillance tool. We acquire assets, not liabilities. Stage 5, Foreign Policy and Trade. She'd already drafted a basic trading framework. A kilo of Crimson Vigor rice was valued at the equivalent of a fully functional assault rifle with 500 rounds. A single one of my super tomatoes was worth a gallon of gasoline. She was pricing the apocalypse. I looked up from the notebook, completely stunned. I hadn't rescued a survivor. I had salvaged a supercomputer with a soul. I thought I was the king, but I was just the guy sitting on a gold mine with a shovel. She had just handed me the blueprints for the entire mining operation, the refinery, and the bank that would control it all. So, she said, a little nervously, what do you think? I just started to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated delight. I think, I said, tapping the notebook, that I've been a goddamn idiot. Amelia Vance, welcome to the board of directors. Your plan is approved, effective immediately. A genuine, brilliant smile lit up her face. The first I'd seen. In that moment, she wasn't just my first follower, she was my first partner. First order of business, I said, grinning. Stage 1, let's go build a moat. I went to the sanctuary interface in my mind, the mental storeroom of all my genetic wonders. Let's see, algae, no, needs sunlight. How about this? My mind latched onto a new organism I'd been cultivating from a chunk of mutated river sludge. I pulled a small, slimy bundle of dark green tendrils from the air, which materialized dripping onto the floor. Purifier kelp. According to the specs, a single strand can make 1,000 gallons of sewage drinkable in an hour. Amelia's eyes widened. The applications are staggering. You write the plans, I'll provide the miracles, I said. Let's get to work. Miles away, in the squalid, makeshift camp that had sprung up in the ruins of the old town, a fat man named Big Bill spat a wad of brown phlegm onto the dirt floor of his shack. He stared out towards the distant valley, his eyes filled with a greasy mix of envy and resentment. He remembered Leo, the quiet city boy who came back to his grandpa's old place. The boy he and the other, real men, of the town used to mock. He'd seen the smoke from Leo's chimney, smelled food on the wind. It drove him insane with jealousy. He finally got a signal on his scavenged ham radio. He'd been trying for days to reach a name he'd heard whispered in the dark. A name that meant violence and power. The radio crackled to life. This is Badger 1. State your business. Big Bill licked his lips, his voice a pathetic whine. Badger 1, sir. My name is Bill. I have information. About a stash. A huge one. Food, water, everything. A lone man, soft city hands, holding it all in a valley just east of here. There was a pause on the other end. Then a low, gravelly chuckle. A treasure map, huh? What's in it for you, Billy boy? Just a place in your new world, sir, Bill groveled. And I want to see his face when you take it all away from him. The voice on the radio laughed again. Send us the coordinates. We'll pay your little friend a visit. Big Bill eagerly rattled off the location, his heart pounding with vindictive glee. He had no idea he wasn't just inviting wolves into the sheep pen. He was sending a pack of mangy coyotes to go knock on the door of a dragon. I was unaware of the petty betrayal brewing miles away. My focus was on the future. As Amelia and I worked on the new water system, my forward scouts, a squadron of beetles, were conducting their newly programmed patrol grids. They swept over the desolate landscape, their hive-mind vision feeding a constant stream of data back to me. A flicker of movement here, a pack of screamers there. Then, one of them picked up something new. It wasn't a life sign. It wasn't a heat signature. It was a signal, faint, rhythmic, repeating. An SOS broadcast on an unusual frequency. I focused my attention on that single beetle, pushing for a clearer image. The signal was coming from a low, sprawling complex on the outskirts of the city. Weeds and mutated vines crawled up its walls, but the logo on the side was still partially visible. Omni-Gen Botanicals Research. A lab, a plant-based genetics lab. My internal goblin, the one that screamed for more, sat up and paid attention. Amelia was my first acquisition. A priceless one. Now, it looked like it was time to go hunting for my second. Amelia's 5-stage plan wasn't just a to-do list, it was a goddamn prophecy. With her running the numbers and me providing the impossible, the valley was transforming at a speed that defied logic. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving, building a little green kingdom at the end of the world. While we worked, my beetle drones were my eyes and ears, painting a grim picture of the world 50 days after the fall. Out there, civilization had fully evaporated. The hunger was a palpable thing, a living monster driving people to do the unspeakable. I'd seen drone footage of things that made my stomach churn, things that made me double-check the locks on my ridiculously secure front door. My sanctuary was getting hungry, too. The soil heart, the thrumming core of my private dimension, was pulsing for more than just water and sunlight. It craved energy, exotic energy. I'd been feeding it the crystalline cores of some of the nastier mutated beasts I'd dealt with, but I had something special I'd been saving. I'd found a small, fist-sized meteorite shard a few weeks back, humming with a low-level, weird-ass radiation. Following a hunch, I heaved the chunk of space rock into the soil heart. The effect was instantaneous. My entire dimension groaned, a deep, tectonic shudder that vibrated through the soles of my feet. The very air grew thick. A new structure bubbled up from the ground near the soil heart, a smooth, obsidian altar about the size of a king bed. It had a gaping maw in the center, swirling with a faint purple energy. The sanctuary fed me the information directly into my brain, the elemental forge. I could toss anything, a dead monster, a broken-down car, a pile of trash, into the maw, and it would be unmade, neatly sorted into piles of its core components. Carbon, iron, nitrogen, water, raw ingredients for a new world. Pure, unadulterated recycling. I grinned. The universe had just given me the ultimate garbage disposal. But first things first, that SOS signal my drone picked up from OmniGen Botanical's research. A nest of plant scientists. Seemed like a good place to find some new seeds, maybe even a new recruit. Amelia, ever the strategist, immediately saw the value. A genetics lab, even a ruined one, could hold decades of research. Seeds, data, equipment, she said, her eyes gleaming with the light of a corporate raider sniffing out a hostile takeover. It's a high-risk, high-reward acquisition. What's the risk? I asked, already prepping a small go bag. A few of my explosive det corn cobs, a canteen of purified water, and a couple of super tomatoes for snacks. Amelia pulled up the drone footage on a tablet I'd managed to power. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger, amazing how she still found a way, at the building. It's not just overgrown with weeds, Leo. It's contained. Look at the perimeter. Those aren't normal vines. See the way they ride? The color? This lab isn't abandoned. It's besieged by its own experiments. She was right. The place looked like a B-movie set. Vicious-looking tendrils, thick as pythons, pulsed with a sickly green light. Spindly, flower-like turrets studded the walls, dripping some kind of black goo. To anyone else, it was a death trap. To me, it was a farm-to-table buffet of raw materials for my new forge. All right, you stay here and run the fort, I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. I'm going shopping. Be careful, she said, her voice betraying a hint of genuine concern. Protocols state we can't afford to lose our primary miracle provider. Don't worry, I winked. I'm the best there is at what I do. And what I do is talk to plants. The drive to OmniGen was a tour through a graveyard. Rusted-out cars littered the highway like steel carcasses. Wind whistled through the shattered windows of abandoned strip malls. The world was gray and brown, a washed-out photograph of what it used to be. The closer I got to the lab, the more the plant life changed. The normal, desperate weeds gave way to things with an unsettling intelligence in their movements. Things that twisted to follow my truck as I drove by. I parked a safe distance away and approached on foot. The air here was thick and smelled of chlorine and rotting blossoms. A massive, Venus flytrap-looking thing with teeth like shards of glass snapped at a mutated rat that scurried too close, swallowing it whole with a wet crunch. A little further on, one of the flower turrets spat a glob of black acid that sizzled and ate a hole straight through the asphalt. It was a botanical minefield. Amelia would have called for a tactical retreat. Anyone else would have run screaming. Me? I just took a deep breath and reached out with my mind. My power, the verdant command, wasn't just about making plants grow. It was a connection, a deep and fundamental understanding of all things green and rooted. To them, I wasn't an intruder. I was, well, I guess I was something like a god. A wave of calming intent flowed out from me, a silent whisper on a frequency only they could hear. Easy now, Daddy's home. The effect was comical. The giant, rat-eating flytrap, which had been gnashing its leafy jaws, suddenly went still. It drooped, its toothy maw closing gently, and it leaned towards me like a sunflower seeking the sun. The acid-spitting turrets retracted their nozzles, their petals folding up into neat, inoffensive buds. The writhing, python-like vines on the walls stopped their menacing pulsing and arranged themselves into something that looked suspiciously like a welcome mat. I walked through the Garden of Horrors like I was strolling through Central Park. The deadliest plants on the planet were acting like well-behaved puppies, practically begging for a scratch behind the ears. I patted the head of the giant flytrap as I passed. It shivered in what I could only describe as pure, leafy pleasure. The front doors of the lab were barricaded from the inside, but a cluster of parasite creepers I'd brought along made short work of it, their roots dissolving the metal locks into dust in seconds. I stepped inside. The interior was a mess. Papers, broken glass, and dead, desiccated plants littered the floor. A trail of discarded lab coats and overturned equipment led deeper into the facility. And I could feel it, a flicker of human life. Faint, weak, but there. I followed the feeling to the main greenhouse chamber. The air was hot and humid, and in the center of the room, slumped against a planter box, was a woman. She was rail-thin, with wild, matted hair and the haunted, hollowed-out eyes of someone who had stared into the abyss for too long. This had to be my SOS sender. This had to be Dr. Ivy Rosen. She saw me, and her eyes widened in terror. She scrabbled backwards, trying to put distance between us, her voice a raw croak. "Stay back. They'll get you. They're everywhere." I looked around. She was right. The greenhouse was filled with her most successful failures. Cacti that fired needle-like thorns, fungi that puffed out clouds of neurotoxic spores, vines that glowed with deadly radiation. But right now, they were all as docile as houseplants. "They seem fine to me," I said calmly, stepping over a tentacle that gently moved itself out of my way. Her brain couldn't process it. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, and I had just walked in and told the guards to take a coffee break. I could see she was on the verge of total collapse, starving and dehydrated. I knelt down, opened my bag, and took out one of the tomatoes from my sanctuary. It was a perfect specimen, blood red, plump, and glowing with a faint, internal light. It was packed to the gills with pure, unadulterated life energy. I held it out to her. "Here," I said, "you look like you could use a snack." She stared at the tomato like it was an alien artifact. Her scientific mind, buried under layers of fear and starvation, must have been screaming at the impossibility of it. A perfect, healthy fruit in the middle of the apocalypse. Hesitantly, she reached out a trembling hand. The moment her fingers touched the skin of the tomato, she gasped. Her eyes, which were a dull, defeated brown, suddenly flared with brilliant green light. I'd forgotten about her own power, the one listed in the dossier Amelia had cobbled together, biochemical sense. She didn't just feel the tomato, she read it. She saw its flawless cellular structure, the impossibly complex and stable DNA, the sheer density of life force packed within it. She was a master musician hearing a lost symphony by Beethoven for the first time. Tears streamed down her face. She took a bite. The flavor, the rush of pure energy, hit her like a lightning bolt. Her whole body shuddered. Life, real and vibrant, flooded back into her wasted frame. Then she did something I absolutely did not expect. She scrambled forward, dropped to her knees, and grabbed my pant leg. Her head was bowed, her body trembling with a mixture of awe and reverence. "A god," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "The genetic code, it's perfect. It's not evolution, it's intelligent design. Your design." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with the fervor of a born-again convert. "You are the primordial gardener. The botanical messiah. Please, I beg you, let me serve you, let me study these divine works of art." Well, damn, I came looking for a scientist and found my first true believer. Back at the valley, the reunion was something else. Amelia, the cold hard facts CEO, and Ivy, the newly converted science fanatic, clicked instantly. While Ivy showered, weeping with joy at the sight of hot, clean water, Amelia and I took stock. Ivy's lab was a treasure trove. Not the dangerous plants, but her research notes, her seed banks of pre-apocalypse species, her equipment. "She's a level A asset," Amelia declared, already typing furiously on her tablet, integrating Ivy into her grand plan. "With her expertise and your raw material, we can accelerate stage 3 by months." My first order of business was cleaning up Ivy's mess. I led my new, over-eager disciple back to the OmniGen lab. "What are we going to do with all of them?" she asked, looking at her former captors. "Recycle," I said with a grin. I stood in the center of the greenhouse and gave a new command. March. One by one, the killer plants uprooted themselves. The acid spitters, the thorn cacti, the neurospore fungi. They formed an orderly, single-file line and marched out of the lab, following me like the children of Hamelin. Ivy just watched, her jaw on the floor. We led the parade of botanical nightmares back to my valley, right up to the new elemental forge. In you go, I commanded. Without hesitation, the lead plant, the giant rat-eater, plopped itself into the swirling purple maw of the forge. It vanished without a sound. The others followed, one after another, sacrificing themselves to their new god. The forge hummed with power, and on the other side, neat piles of raw elements began to form: carbon, water, various nitrates and phosphates. But there was something new. A rich, dark slurry was oozing out of a separate spout. The forge identified it for me: prime biotic fertilizer. Essence of life, distilled and potent. I fed it to the soil heart. The entire dimension sang with joy, and the growth rate timer in my head ticked up from 130 to 135. Production was booming. That evening, the three of us celebrated with a proper meal. As we ate, a crackle came from the ham radio Amelia had been monitoring. It was a wide-band broadcast, powerful and clear. A stern, official voice cut through the static. This is a general broadcast from the Reconstruction Coalition based out of Fort Gannon. We have established a secure zone. We are actively recruiting any and all surviving personnel with expertise in engineering, medicine, and the sciences. The coalition is rebuilding. There is hope. Amelia and I exchanged a look. A new player had just stepped onto the board. A big one. But I wasn't too worried. They had soldiers and guns. I had magic. And far away, a man named Badger was listening to the same broadcast. He laughed, a low, guttural sound. Reconstruction? Fools. He turned to his men, a pack of hard-faced mercenaries armed with military-grade hardware. They were looking at a map, a hand-drawn piece of crap given to them by some sniveling fat man from a ruined town. A big red X was marked over a very familiar-looking valley. Forget the army, Badger growled, tapping the X. The intel says this is where the real prize is. A one-man gold mine. We hit it at dawn. We take it all. They had no idea. They weren't raiders coming to hit a gold mine. They were just fertilizer, getting ready for delivery. The world was cooking itself. 2 months in, and the planet decided to throw a global heatwave into the apocalypse-themed party. The sun wasn't a friendly yellow orb anymore. It was a malevolent white eye in a hazy, bleached-out sky. We clocked the temperature at 115 degrees in the shade yesterday. Out in the blasted hellscape that used to be America, natural water sources were either baked into cracked mud or festering with God knows what kind of biological nasty. Clean water, I heard over the radio chatter, was now worth more than ammo. People were literally killing each other for a half-empty plastic bottle. Meanwhile, in my little corner of paradise, the air was a pleasant 75 degrees. The river, fed by the tireless, purified spring in my sanctuary, flowed cool and clear. My ladies, Amelia and Ivy, were lounging on the porch in shorts and t-shirts, sipping iced tea. Life was good, a little too good, maybe. In this new world, prosperity is a lighthouse, and it attracts all sorts of ships, from desperate refugees to pissed-off pirates. My own senses, juiced up on a steady diet of supercharged sanctuary produce, had long since expanded to cover the entire valley. It wasn't like hearing or seeing, it was a low-level hum in the back of my mind, a constant awareness of every living thing within my domain. I could feel the rhythmic pulse of the grasper vines buried under the soil, the sleepy contentment of the carapace trees, and the frantic heartbeat of a rabbit hiding from a hawk. Which is why I wasn't surprised when I felt 2 separate groups of unwelcome life signs encroach on my territory. The first was a big, noisy metal bird, churning the air miles away. Military. The second was subtler, a pack of jackals slinking through the sun-scorched hills, sticking to the shadows. Badger and his band of morons, right on schedule. It seems the fat ass from town had sold them a map. I smiled. 2 problems arriving at once. How efficient. Company's coming, I announced, not even looking up from the new strain of bioluminescent moss Ivy and I were working on. Amelia immediately sat up straight, her CEO mode activating. Ivy just looked excited, like a kid about to see a new exhibit at the zoo. Which one? Amelia asked, already pulling up the feed from our new perimeter scouts. Ivy, the little genius, had managed to crossbreed my carapace beetles with some pre-fall chameleon DNA she had on file. The result, which she'd adorably named chroma drones, were scout insects that could perfectly mimic any surface they landed on. Nearly invisible, through the eyes of a drone clinging to a withered pine tree, I saw them. A dozen men in mismatched tactical gear, led by a grimy-looking brute with a tiger-stripe camo pattern on his pants. Badger. In another drone's feed, I saw the source of the noise, a sleek, black helicopter, a stark contrast to the rusty world, bearing the insignia of the Reconstruction Coalition. Both, I said, a grin spreading across my face. Get the popcorn ready, the show's about to start. The helicopter landed first, kicking up a storm of dust right outside my defensive perimeter of writhing vines. The ramp lowered and out marched a squad of 6 soldiers in pristine combat gear, M4s held at a perfect low ready. They moved with a disciplined crispness that screamed professional. Leading them was a man who looked like a Ken doll in combat fatigues. Young, handsome in a bland sort of way, with a jawline you could sharpen an axe on and an expression of supreme, unearned arrogance. He strode forward, stopping just short of my vine wall, and pulled out a datapad. "I am Lieutenant Drake of the Reconstruction Coalition," he announced, his voice carrying an irritating, self-important boom. "By the authority granted in the Emergency Reclamation Act, this territory, designated Zone 7G, and all its resources are hereby requisitioned for the good of human survival." I swear to God, I think he practiced that speech in the mirror. Amelia let out a soft, contemptuous snort beside me. I strolled out onto the porch, leaving my own weapon behind. I leaned against the railing, crossing my arms. "Requisitioned? That's a big word. Did you bring a warrant?" Drake's perfect face soured. "This is not a negotiation, civilian. Our satellites have identified this valley as a unique botanical anomaly. Your cultivation techniques are vital. You will hand over all agricultural assets and data, or we will be forced to take them." Ah, the old, "for the greater good," speech. The same one they used to justify poisoning farmland or screwing over the little guy. I felt a familiar, cold anger stir, but I pushed it down, replacing it with amusement. These people never learn. Forced? I chuckled. That sounds stressful. You guys look hot. Thirsty? Without waiting for an answer, I walked back inside, grabbed a pitcher of crystal clear water from the fridge. Water so pure it practically sparkled, and a single glass. I walked back out and poured him a tall, cool one, the ice cubes clinking musically. I held it out. "Here, on the house." Drake's eyes narrowed in suspicion. One of his soldiers raised a scanner at the glass. "Sir, readings are clean." "Impossibly so. Zero contaminants, elevated levels of bioavailable energy?" Drake sneered, thinking it was a trick. But the heat was real, and his throat was dry. With a "what the hell" shrug, he snatched the glass and took a defiant gulp. And then it happened. His eyes went wide, utterly, completely wide. I saw it, the flicker of power within him, some kind of metal manipulation ability, suddenly flaring to life like a starved fire doused in gasoline. He could feel the pure, untainted life force in that water flooding his system, supercharging his cells, making his dormant power sing. He stared at the half-empty glass in his hand as if it were the Holy Grail. The arrogance on his face melted away, replaced by raw, naked greed. He looked from the glass to my lush green valley, to my comfortable-looking house, and he understood. He finally understood what he was dealing with. This wasn't just a farm. It was a treasure beyond measure. What is this water?" he breathed, his voice losing its authoritative edge. "Just water," I said with a shrug. "Now, about this requisition business." He'd made his choice. Greed won. His eyes hardened. "This changes nothing. A resource this valuable cannot be left in private hands. Seize it all," he barked at his men. The soldiers, startled by his sudden shift, raised their M4s. They took a step forward. I sighed dramatically. Well, I tried to be nice. I snapped my fingers. It wasn't a loud sound. Just a simple click. The ground erupted, not with an explosion, but with a silent, terrifying surge of green. Dozens of grasper vines, thick as a man's arm and moving with the speed of striking cobras, shot out of the earth. There was a series of sharp, whip-crack sounds as they coiled around the soldiers' rifles, suppressors, and sidearms. Before a single one of them could even process what was happening, their weapons were yanked from their hands with bone-jarring force and dragged under the soil, disappearing completely. One soldier who held on too tight was lifted off his feet and slammed face first into the dirt before the vine released his now empty hands. In less than 2 seconds, the entire elite squad was disarmed, standing there looking utterly bewildered, their hands empty, their training useless. Lieutenant Drake stared, his jaw hanging open. He tried to activate his power. I could feel it, a desperate pull on the metallic elements in the soil. But the vines, suffused with my energy, simply ignored him. You can't command a river not to flow, and you can't command my vines to let go. His metal abilities were useless against the overwhelming force of pure, directed life. His Ken doll face went from tan to red to a sickly, pale white. The sheer impossibility of it had shattered his reality. Up in the hills, I could feel the giddy excitement from Badger's little group through my chroma drone. Their leader, a corpulent slob I recognized as Fat Dave, the town's former pawnshop owner, was practically vibrating with joy. See, they're fighting. Let them soften each other up. Then we go in and take it all, he wheezed to Badger. What a brilliant strategist. Drake, to his credit, was faster on the uptake than I expected. He realized force was a dead end. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and raised his empty hands. Wait, hold on, there's been a misunderstanding. Clearly, you're not just a simple farmer. He fumbled for his radio. I need to report this. I need to contact my commanding officer. We have discovered a class of biological power. I just smiled, enjoying the view. The all-powerful coalition soldier, reduced to a stammering bureaucrat asking for permission. It was beautiful, but Badger, the simple-minded thug, was running out of patience. His jackal-like brain saw a disarmed military squad and a guy on a porch. He saw weakness, opportunity, screw waiting. I heard him growl through my drone. They're just standing there, light him up, kill them all. Just as Drake was about to speak into his radio, the idyllic afternoon was ripped apart by the violent chatter of automatic gunfire. Bullets rained down from the surrounding hillsides, kicking up dirt all around the terrified coalition soldiers and peppering the front of my house. The distinct, throat-clearing roar of AKs and hunting rifles echoed through my peaceful valley. Badger and his crew of idiots had opened fire on everyone, hoping to wipe out both sides in one glorious, stupid ambush. Drake and his men dove for cover, their faces masks of panic. They were trained soldiers, but they were pinned down, weaponless, in the middle of a kill zone. Amateurs. They brought guns to a garden fight. It was almost insulting. The abrupt, angry chatter of Alaska 47s ripped through my valley like a chainsaw through silk. For about half a second, the world was just noise and flying dirt. Drake and his pristine coalition squad, who 5 minutes ago were acting like they owned the place, hit the deck like terrified gophers. Their faces, once full of military arrogance, were now pale masks of sheer panic. They were trained, sure, but trained for a world with rules. In their world, you don't get disarmed by plant life right before a third party opens up on you from the high ground. Looked like they skipped the "what to do when you're caught between a plant god and a redneck firing squad" section in their training manual. Amelia didn't even flinch, her eyes glued to the monitor displaying the drone feeds. Ivy, however, let out a little gasp, more in excitement than fear. I stayed put, leaning against the porch railing, feeling the thud of bullets peppering the super-hardened wood of my house. Annoying. They were scratching the paint job. Idiots, I muttered, my voice barely audible over the din. Through the eyes of my chroma drones, I had a front-row seat to the dumbest ambush in apocalyptic history. Badger and his dozen or so goons were holed up in the hills, spraying bullets with all the accuracy of a stormtrooper on meth. Their leader, a corpulent slob I recognized as Fat Dave, the town's sleazy ex-pawn shop owner who'd sold them the map, was yelling encouragement. Get him all, the valley's ours, he wheezed, his jowls jiggling with every word. A true military genius, that one. Drake, to his credit, was screaming orders. Return fire, return fire. One of his soldiers, a kid who looked barely 20, yelled back, his voice cracking. With what, sir? They took our guns. Ah, right, that. My vines had been very thorough. I sighed. The novelty was wearing off. Time to take out the trash. They brought guns to a garden fight, I said to Amelia, who gave a slight, predatory smile. That's just rude. I raised my right hand, palm open, towards the hills where the gunfire was originating. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just focused, pushing a sliver of my will, my intent, out into my domain. The assault from the hills didn't just stop. It choked. One moment there was a cacophony of gunfire, the next, a series of metallic clicks, sputters, and then panicked, confused yells. What the hell? My gun's jammed. Mine too. The bolt's stuck. Something's in my barrel. Get it out. Through the drone feed, I watched the chaos unfold. It wasn't magic. It was worse. From the tree bark, from the dusty ground, from the very air itself, a swarm had risen. A living cloud of my carapace beetles. Ivy had done wonders with them. They were small, no bigger than a fingernail, and their chameleon-like shells made them functionally invisible until they were already on you. They moved like a single, silent hurricane, a river of chitin and legs, flowing directly into the source of the noise. They swarmed the raiders' guns, their tiny, diamond-hard bodies clogging barrels, jamming firing pins, and burrowing into ejection ports. But they didn't stop there. The main swarm descended on the men themselves. They weren't biting, not yet. They were just crawling. A living tide of invisible insects crawling into their eyes, up their noses, into their open, screaming mouths. The raiders dropped their useless weapons, clawing at their own faces, shrieking in a way that made the coalition soldiers' panic look like mild concern. One man, trying to fire his jammed AK, had it blow up in his face in a puff of smoke and metal shards. The firefight had turned into a ballet of self-inflicted agony. It was beautiful. Phase 1 complete, I said, a slight grin touching my lips. Now for Phase 2. From a pouch on my belt, I pulled out a small handful of what looked like oversized, dried corn kernels. They were a golden yellow, with faint red streaks running through them. Ivy's latest masterpiece, a project born from a drunken late-night, what-if, session. We called them, popcorn. Simple, elegant, deadly. With a casual flick of my wrist, I threw the handful of kernels into the air. They shot from my hand not like a simple toss, but like a shotgun blast, fanning out in a wide arc towards the panicked, bug-infested morons on the hill. They whistled through the air, dozens of tiny projectiles that embedded themselves in the dirt, in tree trunks, and in the flesh of a couple of unlucky raiders, all around their positions. For a single, beautiful second, there was silence again, broken only by the whimpering of grown men covered in bugs. Then I clenched my fist. The first kernel exploded. It wasn't a massive blast, more like a firecracker on steroids, a sharp pop that sent a small shockwave and a spray of superheated shrapnel outwards. Then the second went off. Then the third. Then dozens at once, a cascading, popcorn from hell's symphony of destruction. Each kernel detonated with the force of a small grenade, chain reacting with the ones nearest to it. The entire hillside erupted in a rolling barrage of smoke, fire, and concussive force. Trees splintered, rocks cracked, the screams were cut off instantly, replaced by the wet, sickening thuds of bodies being torn apart and thrown like ragdolls. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds. When the dust began to settle, there was nothing left but smoking craters, mangled corpses, and a bloody red mist that hung heavy in the scorching air. The battle was over. Well, almost. One figure had managed to crawl away from the epicenter of the blasts. Fat Dave. He had been at the back, cowering behind a large boulder. He was screaming, half from terror, half from the beetles still crawling all over him, as he scrambled on his hands and knees, trying desperately to flee back the way he came. "Oh no, you don't," I mused. "You're the tour guide, you get the special tour." I focused on the ground just in front of him. A thick, woody root, as wide as my wrist and sharpened to a nasty point, shot up from the dry earth. It wasn't silent like the vines. This one tore through the soil with a sickening rip. Fat Dave's shriek of terror turned into a gargled scream of pure agony as the root punched straight through the calf of his right leg, pinning him to the ground. He writhed, a pig stuck on a spit, his blood staining the thirsty earth a dark, ugly crimson. The silence that followed was absolute. Complete, the kind of silence that echoes. The coalition soldiers, still prone on the ground, slowly pushed themselves up. They looked from the carnage on the hill, to the screaming, impaled man, and then back to me. I hadn't moved an inch from my porch. I hadn't fired a shot. I hadn't even raised my voice. Lieutenant Drake's Ken doll face was the color of spoiled milk. The arrogance was gone, vaporized. The greed was gone, replaced by a primal, soul-deep terror. He was staring at me not as a civilian, not as a target, but as a Lovecraftian horror in a t-shirt and cargo pants. I casually walked off the porch, my boots crunching on the dry ground. I ignored the soldiers, their wide, terrified eyes tracking my every move. I walked right up to Fat Dave, whose blubbering had devolved into pathetic, pain-filled moans. Without breaking stride, I placed my boot firmly on his non-impaled hand, grinding it into the dirt. He yelped. I looked up, my eyes meeting Drake's. "This," I said, my voice calm and even, but carrying across the dead silent valley, "is my answer to your requisition." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You want to trade? Bring something of actual value. Bring knowledge, bring rare materials, bring people worth saving. We can make a deal. I'm a reasonable man." I then jerked my chin towards the hill, where my grasper vines were now silently, efficiently slithering out from the ground. They began to coil around the limbs of the dead raiders, dragging the bodies and their ruined equipment into the earth to be broken down, to become fertilizer for the very ground they tried to conquer. "But if you want to take what's mine," I let my gaze settle back on Drake, cold and hard as flint. "That is the only outcome. You become compost." Drake swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He had seen power before. He had power, but this was different. This wasn't a Nong, an ability. This was an entire ecosystem, a food chain, with me at the very top. He and his elite soldiers weren't even predators here. They were prey, less than prey, they were potential nutrients. He fumbled to regain his composure, snapping to a wobbly, formal posture. I understand. There has been a grave misunderstanding." He raised his radio, his hand shaking slightly. "This is Lieutenant Drake, requesting immediate permission to withdraw. We have made contact with a Class S biological entity. I repeat, a green god. Requisition order is cancelled. We are standing down." I almost laughed at "green god." A bit dramatic, but it had a nice ring to it. Fat Dave, meanwhile, was looking at me with eyes full of tears and snot. Please, let me go," he begged. "I'll do anything. I didn't know. I can be useful." I looked down at him, my expression unreadable. "Useful? You led a pack of hyenas to my door. You brought violence to my home. Your usefulness has expired." I turned to the two grasper vines that had stopped nearby, as if waiting for orders. "Take him to the decomposer," I commanded. "Recycle him." The vines shot forward, wrapping around his limbs. Fat Dave's eyes went wide with a new, fresh horror as he was lifted into the air and dragged, screaming and struggling, toward a separate part of the property where Ivy's newest, most terrifying machine churned silently beneath the earth. A fate worse than just dying. I walked back to the porch where Amelia was calmly making notes on a datapad. "Enemy combatants neutralized," she said, as if reporting quarterly earnings. "Minimal structural damage to the primary residence. Total engagement time, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Resources expended, approximately 100 carapace beetles and 73 kernel grenades. Resources acquired, 12 sets of assorted firearms and tactical gear, now being processed." A net positive exchange. Ivy bounced on the balls of her feet, her eyes sparkling. "Can I get some tissue samples from the compost?" The way their bodies reacted to the kernel shrapnel was fascinating. "And the metals from their guns. We can feed them to the decomposer and have enough refined steel to start growing the first section of the steel-spiked durian wall." "See? My girls get it. Nothing is ever wasted." As Drake and his shell-shocked squad scrambled back into their helicopter, their faces pale and their hands empty, I knew the message had been sent. The rumor mill of the apocalypse was about to get a major update. The whispered stories of a lush valley would now have teeth. Fangs, even. They would speak of a place where the ground itself fought for its master, where bullets became useless, and where enemies were turned into fertilizer. Far away, in the skeletal remains of a military training base 200 kilometers to the east, Sonia clutched her sniper rifle. 3 bullets. That's all she had left. In front of her and the small group of terrified survivors she protected, a pack of mutated, mange-ridden wolves with glowing red eyes and far too many teeth were sniffing the air, preparing for their final charge. Hope was a currency she had run out of days ago. Then, the old battery-powered radio she'd salvaged crackled to life. A panicked, garbled transmission, breaking through the static. "Stay away from Zone 7G. Ground itself is alive, killed them all, a god, a green god." The transmission died, but a single, impossible spark had been lit in Sonia's exhausted soul. A green god, a valley where the ground was alive. It was insane, it was impossible, but in a world gone mad, impossible was the only kind of hope left. With her last 3 bullets, she would have to buy enough time to find it.